High Scholar Vexton stood before the War Council with confidence burning in his chest. Behind him, holographic displays showed 20 years of research, thousands of hours of intercepted human broadcasts, and detailed analysis of every major conflict in human history. The council members, their scaled skin gleaming under the chamber lights, waited for his final assessment. "Esteemed council," Vexton began, his voice steady. "After 2 decades of study, I can conclude with certainty that humanity poses minimal threat to the Empire." The council leader leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Explain." Vexton activated the first display. Images of human warfare filled the space between them. Soldiers in trenches, cities burning, mushroom clouds rising into atmospheres. Humans are a fractured species. They divide themselves by arbitrary categories: skin color, geographic location, religious belief, economic systems. In the past century alone, they have engaged in 2 massive global conflicts, killing over 100 million of their own kind. "Their capacity for violence is clear," one council member observed. "Against themselves, yes," Vexton agreed. "But this reveals weakness, not strength. They possess nuclear weapons capable of destroying their entire planet. Yet they came within moments of using them during something they called the Cold War. They nearly committed species suicide over ideological differences." He pulled up economic data, political maps showing shifting borders and collapsed governments. Their leadership structures are unstable. Their largest governing bodies are paralyzed by internal disagreement. They waste enormous resources on conflicts that benefit no one. They are, by every measure, inefficient and self-destructive. Another display showed human military capabilities. Their spacecraft were primitive compared to Krethian vessels, little more than metal boxes with basic propulsion systems. Their weapons relied on simple kinetic force and chemical reactions. Their fastest ships would take months to cross distances the Krethian fleet could traverse in days. "Their technology is centuries behind ours," Vexton continued. "They have colonized only 3 worlds beyond their home planet. Their total military fleet consists of approximately 200 combat-capable vessels. We can deploy 10,000. The council members exchanged glances. The numbers were overwhelming in their favor. "What of their tactical capabilities?" the council leader asked. Vexton smiled. This was his favorite part. "I have studied every major military conflict in their recorded history. The humans are predictable. When faced with superior force, they follow patterns. Initially, there is resistance. Then, as casualties mount, morale breaks. Finally, surrender comes when the cost becomes too high." He showed footage from human wars. Soldiers retreating, armies surrendering, peace treaties being signed. They understand the concept of acceptable losses. They negotiate when continuation means destruction. They are, fundamentally, a rational species that values survival over pride. "And yet they survive to reach the stars," another council member noted. "That suggests some capability. Survival through luck and geographic advantage," Vexton countered. "Their evolution occurred on a world with abundant resources and no serious external threats. They developed intelligence to compete with each other, not to face a superior species. Every challenge they overcome has been self-created." He pulled up more data, his 3 fingers dancing across the control interface. "I have analyzed their military doctrine extensively. They have sophisticated strategies, combined arms tactics, strategic bombing, guerrilla warfare, naval blockades. But all of this was developed fighting opponents with similar technology and identical biological limitations. They have no experience against an alien threat." The holographic display shifted to show human strategic thinking. Sun Tzu's Art of War, Clausewitz's theories, modern military academies teaching ancient battles alongside contemporary warfare. They are obsessed with their own history. They study battles from thousands of years ago as if they still hold relevance. This backward-looking mindset makes them predictable. Vex then noted something in his files, something that had puzzled him during his research, but he dismissed it as irrelevant. In all of human history, despite their countless wars and near extinctions, humanity had never faced a threat that could truly erase them from existence. Even in their darkest moments, some part of their species always survived. He marked it as a psychological curiosity and moved on. "What is your recommended strategy?" the council leader asked. "Standard siege protocols," Vexton replied immediately. "We establish orbital superiority, demonstrate overwhelming force, and issue surrender terms. Based on their historical patterns, I estimate capitulation within 3 standard months. 6 at most." He displayed the invasion plan. The Krethian fleet would emerge at the edge of the human solar system, their numbers blocking out the stars. Humanity would see the impossibility of victory and choose survival over pointless resistance. It had worked on 47 other species. The humans would be no different. And if they resist? Another council member asked. Vexton's confidence never wavered. Then we proceed with standard occupation tactics. Target military infrastructure, disrupt supply lines, and impose economic pressure. Their fractured nature works in our favor. Various human factions will negotiate separately. Some will collaborate for preferential treatment. It is their pattern. The council leader looked at the data one final time. The numbers were clear. Human military strength, their technological capabilities, their divided political structure, everything pointed to an easy conquest. The Krethian Empire had spent 3 centuries expanding across the stars. They knew how to evaluate threats. "Your assessment is approved, High Scholar," the council leader declared. "Prepare the fleet. Humanity will become the 48th jewel in the Empire's crown." Vexton bowed, pride swelling within him. This would be his legacy, the culmination of 20 years of research. He had given the Empire everything they needed to know about humanity. As he left the council chamber, Vexton thought about the strange pattern he had noticed and dismissed. Humans had never faced true extinction from an external enemy. Every war in their history had been fought with the unconscious assumption that humanity would continue, that their species would survive regardless of the outcome. He wondered, briefly, what humans might become if that assumption was removed. What would a species do if it faced actual extinction? The thought passed quickly. It was irrelevant. The invasion fleet would launch within the month, and within 6 months, Earth would belong to the Krethian Empire. The research was complete. The outcome was certain. High Scholar Vexton had studied human history thoroughly. He knew everything about them. Everything, he believed, that mattered. Asterisk, the Krethian Armada emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system like a swarm of metal locusts. 10,000 warships, each one larger and more advanced than anything humanity had built. Their arrival sent electromagnetic pulses, racing across every detection system from Neptune to Mercury. Admiral Sarah Chun watched the displays in the UN Space Command headquarters, her coffee growing cold in her hand. The numbers kept climbing. 1,000 ships. 5,000. 10,000. The screen couldn't fit them all. "Get me everyone," she said quietly. "Every nation, every colony, every ship we have. Get them on the line now." Within minutes, her screen filled with faces. The American President, the Chinese Premier, the European Union Council, the African Federation Chairman, the colony governors from Mars, Titan, and Europa. People who had spent years arguing over trade disputes and territorial claims now stared at the same impossible data. The Krethian broadcast came in 73 languages simultaneously. The translation was perfect, the message clear. Surrender within 48 hours or face annihilation. Humanity was outmatched, outgunned, and out of time. Resistance was futile. Admiral Chun expected panic. She expected arguments about whose fault this was, debates about negotiation terms, perhaps even some nations trying to make separate peace deals. She had studied enough history to know how humans acted when faced with overwhelming force. What happened instead surprised even her. The Chinese premier spoke first. "We are transferring all military production data to the shared network. Every weapon system, every ship design, everything. No restrictions." The American president nodded. "Agreed. All classified military research is now declassified. We're uploading quantum encryption keys, railgun specifications, and fusion reactor designs to the common database." One by one, every nation did the same. Secrets that had been guarded for decades, technologies that had cost billions to develop, strategic advantages that had taken years to achieve, all of it shared freely within hours. The petty rivalries that had defined human politics for centuries evaporated like morning fog. "We need a unified command structure," the African Federation chairman said. "No debates, no committees. Admiral Chun, you have operational authority over all human military forces, effective immediately." Chun blinked. "I don't have the authority to *, you do now," the European Council leader interrupted. "Unanimous consent from all voting members. We'll formalize it later, if there is a later." The Mars colony governor pulled up production schedules. "We can retool our mining operations for military manufacturing. We'll have the first new ships ready in 6 weeks. Make it 4, Chun said, her mind already racing through tactical scenarios. Strip everything non-essential. I don't care if they're pretty. I care if they can fight." The transformation was instantaneous and total. Assembly lines that had been making consumer electronics switched to producing weapon systems. Civilian ships were retrofitted with whatever armaments could be attached. Every spaceflight-capable human, regardless of national origin, was integrated into a unified defense force. Chun pulled up the historical files, searching for any precedent, any pattern that might help. She found herself reading about Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans held off thousands. About Stalingrad, where every building became a fortress. About the Winter War, where a tiny nation bloodied a superpower through sheer determination. "They think we'll break," she muttered to herself. "They studied our wars and think they know us." Her second-in-command, Commander James Torres, overheard. "Ma'am, the Crethians, they intercepted our broadcasts, studied our history. They think they understand how we fight." Chun pulled up the tactical display, showing the Crethian fleet's formation. It was textbook siege doctrine, designed to intimidate and overwhelm. They're using the same strategy they probably used on 47 other species. And those species surrendered? Probably because they were rational. Chum smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. The Crethians made one mistake. They assumed we were rational too. The 48 hours passed. Humanity did not surrender. The Crethian fleet advanced on Mars, where a defense force of 20 human ships waited in orbit. The tactical calculation was simple: 20 versus 2,000. The humans should retreat or die quickly. Instead, the human ships scattered in a pattern the Crethians recognized from their historical files. It was a feint, designed to draw the enemy into a trap. The Crethians adjusted their formation, compensating for the tactic they had studied. They knew this move. What they didn't know was that humans had studied it too. And humans knew the counter to the counter. 3 human ships made suicide run straight into the Crethian formation, their reactors deliberately overloaded. They weren't trying to survive. They were trying to create debris fields and electromagnetic chaos. In the confusion, the remaining 17 ships struck from angles the Crethians had left exposed, using weapons that technically shouldn't have worked but did because human engineers had rebuilt them with creative desperation. The Krethians lost 40 ships in the first engagement. The humans lost 7. It wasn't a victory. The mathematics were still impossible. But it wasn't the massacre the Krethians expected either. Commander Torres watched the battle data, his face pale. Those 3 ships that made the suicide runs. They volunteered. We didn't have to order it. They just did it. Chun nodded, her throat tight. Send their names to Earth. Make sure everyone knows. More battles followed. At Europa, at Titan, in the asteroid belt. Each time, humans employed tactics the Krethians recognized from the historical database. Each time, the tactics didn't work quite the way they should have. Humans traded ships at ratios that made no strategic sense, buying time instead of preserving forces. The Krethians began to notice something strange. Human industrial output was increasing, not decreasing. Their economy, which should have collapsed under wartime strain, was somehow accelerating. Factories that had made luxury goods were producing warships at rates the Krethian analysts had calculated as impossible. Vexthun reviewed the data from his station on the flagship. Confusion gnawing at his certainty. The humans were following historical patterns, yes, but something was different. They fought with desperation, with creativity, with a willingness to sacrifice that went beyond tactical doctrine. He intercepted a human communication, a soldier's final message to his family before a suicide mission. The words chilled him. If we can hold them here for 2 more days, Earth gets the reinforcements it needs. That's all that matters. Not us, Earth. The Krethian fleet pushed forward, maintaining numerical superiority despite unexpected losses. But 6 months had passed, and humanity had not surrendered. The timeline Vexthun had promised the Council had expired, and Earth still stood defiant, united in a way his research said was impossible. Something was wrong. The patterns weren't matching. The humans weren't acting like anything in his carefully compiled historical records. They were acting like something new. 6 months into the war. High Scholar Vexthun stood in the intelligence center of the flagship, surrounded by data that refused to make sense. Around him, analysts worked frantically, their scaled faces tight with stress. The map showed human positions, fleet movements, production facilities. Everything was documented. Everything was tracked. But nothing matched the predictions. Explain this, Fleet Commander Zareth demanded, pointing at the production reports. How have the humans tripled their industrial output? Our economic models predicted collapse within 3 months. Vexthun scrolled through the data, searching for errors. There were none. Human factories operated around the clock, staffed by volunteers working double shifts. Resources flowed across former national borders without bureaucratic delay. Supply chains that had been inefficient tangles of competing interests now functioned with perfect coordination. They have eliminated all economic inefficiency, Vexthun said slowly. The competitive markets, the profit motives, the trade disputes, all of it is gone. They are operating as a single unified economy. That's impossible, Zareth said. Our studies showed humans are incapable of that level of cooperation. Our studies were based on peacetime behavior, Vexthun replied. But even as he spoke, doubt crept into his voice. Something fundamental had changed. Something he hadn't predicted. He pulled up the tactical reports from the recent battles. Human forces continued to employ strategies from their historical database. Combined arms assaults, strategic retreats, flanking maneuvers. But they executed them with a ferocity that transformed familiar tactics into something entirely different. At Titan, a human commander had sacrificed her entire fleet to destroy a Krethian supply convoy. The tactical calculation made no sense. She traded 20 ships for 3 cargo vessels. By any rational measure, it was a devastating loss. But those cargo vessels had contained power cells for the Krethian siege weapons, and without them, The assault on Saturn's moons had stalled for weeks. They are making strategically irrational decisions. Vexton muttered, reviewing more battle data. They accept losses that provide minimal tactical advantage. Then why do they keep winning? Zareth asked quietly. The question hung in the air. Winning was too strong a word. The Krethians still held overwhelming numerical superiority. They had captured 2 minor colonies and destroyed hundreds of human ships. But after 6 months, Earth remained unconquered, and the human resistance showed no signs of breaking. Vexton opened his historical files again, searching for patterns he might have missed. He found himself reading about human conflicts with fresh eyes, seeing things he had dismissed before. The Battle of Stalingrad. The Soviets had lost over 1 million soldiers defending a single city. Irrational by any measure. But they had stopped the German advance. The kamikaze pilots of World War II. Thousands of young men deliberately flying their aircraft into enemy ships. Suicide tactics that should have destroyed morale. Instead, they had terrified their enemies. The Warsaw Uprising. Poorly armed resistance fighters, holding off a modern army for 63 days. Knowing they would lose, fighting anyway. He had cataloged these events as examples of human desperation and inefficiency. Now, reviewing them while human ships made similar sacrifices across the Sol system, he began to see them differently. Asterisk. They were practicing, he whispered. What? Zareth leaned closer. Vexton's hands trembled as he pulled up more files. Every battle, every war, every conflict in human history. They weren't just fighting each other. They were developing doctrines, testing strategies, learning what works. And they kept detailed records of everything. He showed Zareth the human military academies, where officers studied battles from thousands of years ago. They analyzed Alexander's tactics, Caesar's logistics, Napoleon's strategies. They read Sun Tzu and Clausewitz. They ran simulations of Gettysburg and Midway. So they know their own history, Zareth said. We knew this. No, Vexton said, his voice rising with panic. We thought they were trapped by their history, doomed to repeat it. But they weren't trapped. They were training. Every war was a lesson. Every defeat taught them something new. For 10,000 years, they have been refining the art of warfare against the most dangerous opponent they ever faced. Which is themselves, Vexton said. They fought other humans. Enemies with the same intelligence, the same creativity, the same biological limitations. They couldn't rely on technological superiority or physical advantages. They had to be smarter, more innovative, more willing to sacrifice. And every generation taught the next one everything they learned. He pulled up intercepted human communications, translating them for Zareth. A general's speech to her troops. We've spent millennia perfecting war. We built empires and watched them fall. We developed weapons that could destroy our world and learned to control them. We turned murder into science and science into art. And now, finally, we get to use all of that knowledge against something that isn't us. Zareth stared at the screen. They sound excited. Because they are, Vexton said, horror creeping into his voice. For the first time in their history, they have an enemy they don't have to feel guilty about destroying. They aren't fighting other humans. There's no shared culture, no common heritage, no possibility of future reconciliation. We are just the enemy. Pure and simple. A new report came in. Human forces had reverse-engineered a captured Krethian shield generator and integrated it into their own ships. The process had taken 3 weeks. Krethian engineers needed 6 months to accomplish similar adaptations. How are they doing this? Zareth demanded, reading the technical analysis. This level of innovation shouldn't be possible under wartime stress. Vexton pulled up more data, his certainty crumbling with every screen. because they have done this before. In their world wars, they developed technologies at incredible speed. Radar, computers, nuclear weapons, jet engines, all of it created under the pressure of survival. They don't slow down during war. They accelerate. Another report. Human forces had deployed a biological weapon specifically engineered to target Krethian physiology. It had been designed, tested, and weaponized in 5 weeks. The Krethians didn't even have bioweapon protocols in their arsenal. It had never been necessary before. They are adapting faster than we can respond, Zareth said quietly. Every tactic we use, they develop a counter. Every weapon we deploy, they find a weakness. Vexton nodded, unable to speak. He thought about the question he had dismissed as irrelevant during his initial research. What would humans become if they faced actual extinction? He was getting his answer, and it terrified him. Humans weren't fighting to win territory or resources. They weren't fighting for political ideology or economic advantage. They were fighting for species survival. And a species fighting for survival didn't follow rational patterns. They didn't calculate acceptable losses. They didn't know when to surrender. The communication systems crackled. A human transmission, broadcast openly across all channels. Admiral Chun's face appeared on screens throughout the Krethian fleet. To the Krethian Empire, she said, her voice calm and clear. You studied our history and thought you understood us. You saw our conflicts and assumed we were weak because we fought each other. What you failed to realize is that fighting each other made us stronger. We learned from the Spartans and the Romans, from the Mongols and the British, from every empire that rose and fell. We studied our own defeats more carefully than our victories. We built museums to honor our enemies and teach future generations what they did right. She paused, letting the translation programs catch up. You are not the first enemy to think humans were easy targets. You are simply the first enemy from outside our species. We have been preparing for you since we first looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. We built weapons that could destroy our own world because we knew that one day we might need to defend it from something else. The transmission ended. Silence filled the intelligence center. Pull all forces back to defensive positions, Zareth ordered. No more offensive operations until we reassess our strategy. But Vexton knew the truth. There was no strategy that would work. The Krethians had made a fundamental error, one that couldn't be corrected with better tactics or superior numbers. They had given humanity a reason to stop fighting itself and turn all that accumulated knowledge, all that refined brutality, all that practiced warfare in one direction. Outward. 18 months after the invasion began. The Krethian War Council convened an emergency session. The holographic displays that had once shown confident projections of victory now displayed something very different. Human ships pushing into Krethian territory. High Scholar Vexton stood before them again. But this time, there was no confidence in his posture. His scales had dulled, and exhaustion lined his face. Behind him, the data told a story of cascading failures. How did this happen? The council leader demanded. Her voice was sharp with barely contained fury. You promised us victory within 6 months. It has been 18 months, and we are losing. Vexton activated the first display, his hands shaking. I was wrong. About everything. The silence was absolute. I studied human history and saw division, he continued. I saw wars between nations, conflicts over resources, ideological struggles that nearly destroyed them. I concluded they were weak because they fought each other. I was incorrect. He showed footage from recent battles. Human ships with names like Defiant, Indomitable, Never Surrender, Remember Earth. Each one fought with a ferocity that defied tactical logic. The humans were not weak because they fought each other. They were training. For 10,000 years, they developed warfare as an art form, a science, a philosophy. Every conflict taught them new lessons. Every defeat was analyzed and studied. Every victory was recorded for future generations. The council members shifted uncomfortably. One spoke up, "But we are technologically superior. We have more ships, better weapons." "All of which means nothing," Vexton interrupted, his voice hollow. "Because humans don't fight the way we expected. They don't follow rational patterns. They make decisions no sane species would make." He pulled up the incident reports. At Europa, a human fleet had deliberately led the Krethian forces into a debris field, then detonated their own ammunition reserves, creating a chain reaction that destroyed everything within 1,000 kilometers. The humans lost every ship. So did the Krethians. The tactical calculation was insane. Why would they do this? A council member asked. "Because they were buying time for Earth," Vexton said. "They traded their lives for 3 days. 3 days during which human factories produced 17 new warships." More reports filled the screens. Human engineers had reverse-engineered not just Krethian shields, but faster-than-light drives, weapon systems, and power cores. Technologies that should have taken years to understand were integrated into human vessels within months. "They are learning faster than we can adapt," Vexton said. "Every ship they capture, they take apart and study. Every weapon we use, they develop counters for. They have no institutional barriers to innovation, no bureaucratic delays, no competing interests slowing down development." The economic data was equally devastating. Human production continued to accelerate. Resources from Earth, Mars, Titan, and the asteroid belt flowed into a unified manufacturing network. Civilian populations worked around the clock, sustained by a unity of purpose the Krethians had thought impossible. "I reviewed our psychological warfare efforts," Vexton continued. "We broadcast images of human casualties, trying to break their morale. We showed them the overwhelming odds they faced. Every tactic that worked on other species failed on humans." He showed intercepted human communications, messages between soldiers, between families, between leaders. There was grief, yes. Fear, certainly. But underneath it all was something the Krethians didn't have a word for in their language. "They call it spite," Vexton said. "The worse the situation becomes, the more determined they grow. We told them surrender was their only option. They responded by fighting harder. We demonstrated our superiority. They took it as a challenge." Fleet Commander Zareth entered the chamber, his uniform scorched from recent combat. "The human counteroffensive has reached the Kelmer system. They are no longer defending. They are attacking." The council leader leaned back, her face grave. "We control this sector. We have fortifications, supply lines. They don't care," Zareth interrupted. "They use tactics from their history. Island hopping, deep strikes, strategic bombing. But they execute them with innovations we can't predict. Yesterday, a human ship used our own gravity well against us, slingshotting around a planet to achieve velocities our sensors couldn't track. They crashed into our command carrier at relativistic speed. That would have killed everyone on the human ship," a council member said. "Yes," Zareth confirmed. "They know. They did it anyway." Vex then pulled up the final piece of evidence, the one that had kept him awake for days. "I have been analyzing why our predictions failed so completely. I have found the critical error." He displayed human military doctrine side by side with Krethian analysis. "We studied wars where both sides had similar technology. Wars where soldiers fought for national interests, economic gain, political ideology. Wars where surrender was always an option because the losing side would still exist after defeat." The hologram shifted, showing the current conflict. "But we are not a rival nation. We are an alien species that invaded their home system with the explicit goal of conquest. To humans, we represent existential threat. And humans have never faced an existential threat from an external enemy before. He let that sink in. Every war in human history was fought with the unconscious assumption that humanity would survive. Even in their darkest moments, even when they built weapons that could destroy their entire planet, some part of humanity always continued. But we removed that assumption. Vexton's voice grew quieter, more haunted. We showed them what extinction looks like. And once humans believe their species might actually end, they transform into something different. Something we have no framework to understand. The council leader looked at the casualty reports, the economic projections, the tactical assessments. All of them pointed to the same conclusion. What are you recommending, High Scholar? Peace, Vexton said immediately. Immediate negotiations. Favorable terms if necessary. We must end this war before it ends us. That is unacceptable, one council member said. We are the Krethian Empire. We do not surrender to inferior species. They are not inferior, Vexton said sharply. That was my mistake. That was all of our mistakes. We measured them by our standards and found them lacking. But humans don't play by our rules. They don't think like we do. They spent 10,000 years fighting the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy themselves, and they kept detailed notes on how to do it better. He pulled up the final image, one that had been captured by a damaged Krethian scout ship. A human warship, its hull scarred by battle damage, limping back to Earth for repairs. Painted across its side in letters 3 meters tall was a quote from human history. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. Churchill, Vexton said, a human leader from one of their world wars. He said this when his nation faced invasion by a superior force. They did not surrender. They fought until they won. The council leader looked at each member in turn. The mathematics were clear. The Krethians could win, perhaps, if they committed everything to total war. But the cost would be catastrophic. And even then, victory was uncertain. Draft the peace terms, she said finally, but make them reasonable. We do not want to give humans a reason to continue fighting. Too late, Zareth said quietly. They already have one. We invaded their home. The negotiations took 3 weeks. The terms were harsh but not impossible. Full withdrawal from human space, technology exchange, reparations, and most significantly, a mutual defense pact. The humans had insisted on that last part. Why would they want a military alliance with us? A council member had asked. The human negotiator, Admiral Chun, had smiled at that. Because now you understand what we're capable of. And because someday, something else might come along. When it does, we want you on our side. The treaty was signed. The Krethian fleet withdrew. And across the galaxy, other spacefaring species watched and took notes. Vexton spent his final days before exile compiling his final report. It would be distributed to every military academy in Krethian space, and eventually, it would make its way to other civilizations. The title was simple: Threat Assessment Failure, the species that practiced war on itself. In the conclusion, he wrote, humanity spent 10,000 years developing warfare against opponents who were their equal in every way. They studied their defeats as carefully as their victories. They preserved the lessons of failed empires and fallen civilizations. They built weapons capable of destroying their world because they understood that survival sometimes requires the capacity for absolute destruction. And through it all, they never faced a threat that could truly erase them. Until we arrived. We gave them their first external enemy, and in doing so, we gave them permission to use everything they had learned. Every strategy refined over millennia. Every weapon developed in countless conflicts. every lesson purchased with the blood of billions. We studied their history and thought we understood them. We were wrong. We studied their wars and saw weakness. We should have seen a training manual. They were not divided. They were preparing. And when we gave them a reason to unite, to stop fighting each other and focus outward, we faced the full weight of 10,000 years of accumulated military knowledge turned against us. To any species considering conflict with humanity, I offer this warning. They call themselves the most warlike species in the galaxy, and they are not boasting. They are simply stating a fact. They know war better than anyone because they have been fighting longer than anyone. And now they know they can win. That, perhaps, is the most terrifying thing of all. Humanity is no longer divided by doubts about their own capability. We proved to them that when united, when threatened with extinction, they are unstoppable. We taught them that lesson, and the galaxy will live with the consequences. Vex then signed the report and sent it into the archive. Then he looked up at the stars and wondered what humans would do next, now that they knew what they were capable of. He suspected the galaxy was about to find out.